But that reminds me that at the beginning of these sessions, even though you've already met me a few times, I should introduce myself. I'm James Lechner, board member at Somm Foundation. We also have Faye Cardwell of Italia di Vino on the call, along with Lynn Fletcher of Somm Foundation, whom you've all communicated with probably extensively. And of course, Greg Van Wagner, the creator of the global diagram of wine, which again, we'll be using today to steer our way through Italy, from Lugana up in the north, all the way down to Sicily. We'll go through Tuscany as well as Liguria, and we've got some really fun, delicious wines to taste today. One of the cool things about this tasting that I'm excited about is we have two Sangioveses, 100% Sangioveses that taste side by side, one from the Chianti Classico village of Rada and one from Montalcino. We also have a second Vermentino. We tasted Vermentino with Luca, Sardinian Vermentino with Luca last week. And Michele will guide us through Cantina Lunae's Vermentino today. It also is absolutely delicious. As you know from last session, I'm a huge Vermentino fan. And then some really tasty Nero d'Avola from Sicily. So I just wanted to kind of kick this off by saying that over the past couple of sessions, one recurrent theme that we're seeing is that technological advances happen, of course, in Italy and throughout the world, and they're wonderful. And we can say that Italian wine in particular has come a long way since the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that is due in great part to people paying attention to what's happening in the vineyard and adapting in the winery as well to meet market demand. And this is the age-old tradition in Italy. We talked about Barolo in the last session, or maybe it was the session before that, and how Barolo, if we harken back 100 years ago, was made as a sweet wine. Of course, we can't even fathom that today, but that is a true story. And I was reminded, in just doing a little bit of reading in preparation for this session, that was a little bit more than 150 years ago that Montalcino was most famous for sweet wine from white grapes. So things have changed quite a bit, haven't they, in a relatively short period of time. And this is inevitably due to market demand. What people want to drink is what the producer is going to make, of course. And so I just want everybody to keep that kind of in the back of their heads as we progress through this session. We have some really fascinating topics to discuss. I'm not sure how deeply we'll be able to get into them. But for instance, I was able to visit Banfi I think it was about 8 years ago. And I was particularly interested in that trip about the Chianti 2000 project, which was a really amazing, in-depth clonal research project on Sangiovese. And that has affected everything in Tuscany. Every producer of Sangiovese is familiar with the clones that were isolated and all of the stuff that happened with research into training methods, et cetera, et cetera. So it had a profound effect, and this happens not that often on such a global scale or locally global scale. Usually it happens in the vineyard. We talked to Alberto a week or two ago about how things have adapted in Alto Adige. Alberto is here to talk to us about Maiol, which is based in Lugana. And I will leave it there. Alberto, welcome. We're happy to have you here. Yes, you are now
yes,
unmuted.
My pleasure.
Alberto, so my question to you is, first of all, if you can set the stage, if people have not been to Lugana before, it's an absolutely stunning part of Italy. So set the stage a little bit for us about where you're at, what the wines are like in this part of Italy, and then go into, if you will, what's happening in terms of adaptations to all of the things that are happening in today's world.
Oh, thank you, James. Hi, everybody. It's very difficult, not a long question. It's not difficult, but really long to answer. Begin where we are. Lake Garda is in the center of north of Italy, between three regions, Veneto on the east, Trentino Alto Adige, the mountain region in the north, and Lombardy to the west side. So it's inside the mountains, but the southern part enter the flatland. Is a sub-Mediterranean climate, as you can see in the view behind me. This is a photo from our vineyards close to Polpenazze in the area of Valtenesi, because Lake Garda, you have to know, have a different kind of grape varieties that are grown. In the north of Trentino Alto Adige, we can find white grapes like Nosiola, not close to the sea, but not, sorry, to the lake, but 10 kilometers to the north. In the south part, you can find Lugana with Trebbiano di Lugana grape, so two white wine. But on the west side and the east side, you can find red grapes. In the east side, the opposite, where I'm now, the opposite side to the Verona province, you can find Corvina, Corvinone, and Rondinella grape, the same as Valpolicella, that is not far from there. In this side, in the west side Lombardy, we have different grapes, like Groppello is a local indigenous grape variety, very similar to, you can say, Schiava or Vernach kind of grape. And very strangely, I could say, three other red grapes that comes from different regions, because here we cultivate Marzemino from Trentino, Sangiovese, original from Tuscany, but is planted here, and Barbera, because historically, Groppello doesn't give a particularly strong wine, because it's very refined and sometimes weak body, very light body. So historically, because we have to enter history to understand why they planted Barbera, Sangiovese, and Marzemino. It's too easy to judge with today's mentality only to say, okay, we go only for the local grapes. At that time, people need to have a good and strong red wine to drink in the farmhouse during work. So they planted grape varieties that help Groppello, that integrate what Groppello was not rich of. So we can use, for example, Barbera for the acidity and the color, the purple color, and then we can use Sangiovese for astringency, tonicity body for red wine, not for Chiaretto. And you can use Marzemino for the red berries, red fruit, together with the spiciness and the light body and acidity of Groppello. So this is the reason why historically in this area, you can find mainly these four grapes. These are subcontinental climate. So, so there is no so wide thermal excursion between day and night, or between summer and winter, not so as in Alto Adige or other regions. Even in the flatland is a continental climate. This is sub-Mediterranean, close to us. You can see in the view there are a lot of olive oil trees. North you can find lemon trees. So the climate is particularly mild and ideal to create this kind, especially Chiaretto, this rosé wine. And the Chiaretto is produced in both sides of the lake. Okay, so you can find Chiaretto on the east side, but the appellation is Bardolino Chiaretto. On the west side, you can find Valtenesi Riviera del Garda Classico, is a Riviera, okay, of classic Garda on the left side, exactly. And a sub-appellation is not a cru because it's a large appellation in any case. You have Valtenesi that distinguish the hilly side of this part west west of the lake. Yes, exactly. This is the area. It's a very smooth hills because they are morainic hills that was derived from the glaciers from the Alps that enter the Pianura Padana, the flatland. When they retired, they left over stones and a lot of materials, clay, stones, pebbles, and create these smooth hills. But depends of the period, because we had glaciers 700 million, 700 million years ago, and the last glaciers was only 10,000 years ago. So we have different kind of hills due to the different erosion. But this is a wonderful soil for this kind of variety, because they can find a perfect place to drink water, because the drainage is good, depends on the area, and the sunlight to enjoy chlorophyll and photosynthesis for the ripening of the grapes. What changed a lot, I answer the second part of the question. What changed was what happened, but I think for everyone, in the vineyards and in the winery. Very important for this area is the fact that the oldest vines we have, oldest, not so old, I mean 30, 40, from 25 to 50 years old, they are usually mixed together, the grape varieties, in the same vineyard. For example, you can find in the same vineyards part of Sangiovese, part of Gropello, a vine of Marzemino, 3 vines of other. And so they were used to blend naturally the grapes. It was not possible to divide. What has happened in the last years, especially when we renovate the vineyards, was to plant every single variety in the place we think it can give its best according to the variety in a separate vineyards, so we can choose the right period of harvest for every variety, differently from the old vineyards that still exist. And so we can accept a mix of the grapes. So we enter usually when Gropello is ripening, but sometimes Barbera is a little overripe and so on. And is a different in the winery, because if you arrive with different the perfect grapes ripe perfectly, properly, we can vinify separately for every variety. So what was the changing mainly was the way to use the vineyards, and consequently the winery, even the training system from Silvo, for example, to Guyot, so lower yields. Now we are using, but I think nearly everyone, no weeding, no chemical fertilization, cover crops between the rows, more sustainable and natural, you can say, agriculture. And you can see in this photo, wonderful photos, you can see some steeper point that is due to the more recent glaciers retirement, and was smooth hills due to the the oldest glaciation. So it's very, very wonderful place, not only for wine, but even for people to live and have a holidays. So I invite you to visit what is a really, really nice area with different characters. For example, and I finish if you want, when you are in Valtenesi, your vineyards see the sunrise. If you are in Bardolino, mainly the vineyards are westwards exposure, so they see the sunset. So this is some differentiation between the two areas, mainly are the grape varieties and the culture. But even the exposure can be different. I say mainly because, as you could see, we have a lot of small valley, and in that position you can have a mesoclimate different from other, and even microclimate between one vine and the other, because of shadows and so on. But it's a really, really nice place to grow grapes. And then we have two styles of wines in this area, because we have red wines from a Valtenesi with the same appellation, Valtenesi Riviera del Garda Classico Red, or Valtenesi Riviera del Garda Classico Chiaretto. This night, sorry for midnight, in this session, we are presenting the Chiaretto version, but I think that I can talk about it later in the tasting. Or if you want now, because the Chiaretto is a different kind of techniques, another example, and then you have to stop me, otherwise I keep on going. Another, in the winery, for example, is we change, and many wineries change from Salasso, Saignée kind of Chiaretto production to pellicular maceration. I mean, to pressing the grapes and use the grapes only for Chiaretto, because Saignée, the main aim was to make a very strong red wine, because you extract, you pull out some juice with a bloody color, but it's an orange color at the first days of fermentation, the first hours, and so to give the same quantity of skins with a low quantity of juice in order to have red grapes. Now we are investing more and more to the Chiaretto, because Chiaretto some years ago was not so famous, like in the other side of the lake, like Bardolino. So we are increasing our knowledgement about the production, about the way to grow. And this is another big passage from Saignée. Then we can say Chiaretto was a byproduct to the Chiaretto that now is the real main and only product of the vineyards and the winery and the fermentation of the grapes.
That's perfect. So obviously the global trend towards rosé has made you vinify differently, right? To really make a wine that is the end product here is the Chiaretto, and not just to make the reds more substantial. I'm really fascinated by co-planting and how the vines tend to talk to one another. Maybe we can discuss this more in the breakout group. But one thing that I have learned over time, and I'm sure that this happens to a certain degree there in those old vineyards that are co-planted, is that the vines tend to have this kind of communication where early ripening vine, grape variety, might adjust its ripening to fall in line with its neighbors. Really interesting stuff. This happens with Pastougran production in Burgundy, for instance, with Gamay and Pinot Noir, and certainly we'll see it throughout Italy too. Thank you, Alberto. As always, you give a wonderful introduction to the place that we're looking at here. And if you haven't been to this particular part of the world, it is a lovely place to drink Chiaretto. Now we're going to zoom over to another lovely, stunning part of the world in Liguria. In Michele, we are going to talk about Vermentino and Cantine and Lunae, and this really fascinating part of Italy. We know Liguria to a certain extent for its amazing seaside villages, the Cinque Terre, but obviously the winemaking tradition goes far beyond that. One thing that I was, I don't know, not surprised at, but didn't realize when we visited a few years ago is just how close it is to Tuscany in the south, and then of course not far from Piedmont in the north. It gives you, and then you have the Apennines to the direct east, and then the sea directly west. So a really kind of fascinating topographical area, and influence not only from Tuscany, but from the north as well. It is its own culture. And this is one thing that we in America, we know something about this. We have regional culture. But in Italy, it can happen in a heartbeat. And so I guess I'd just love to hear you, Michele, talk a little bit about Liguria and your particular patch here, and culture, traditions, and how farming Vermentino and other varieties here has changed over time.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. So my name is Michele Gianazza. I'm the sales director for Cantine Lunae. It's a family company based in Lunae, so the ancient city of the moon that was one of the most famous port, most important port of northern Rome during the Roman ancient empire. And, you know, the historical were already mentioning about Colli di Luni, so the hills of the moon, as one of the best spots for growing vines and producing wine back in the 1st century before Christ. So very long tradition in winemaking. Liguria is a tiny region stretching from the French border to the northern part of Tuscany, just below Piemonte. It sits all along the sea. So it's called the Italian Riviera, as you have the French Riviera. So Liguria is usually known as the Italian Riviera. I know that many of you maybe are not very familiar with this region because it is a small part of the Italian territory. But as I usually do when I do presentation of my wines around the world, I used to mention few things that everybody knows. So I usually say that everybody knows something from Liguria. For instance, you know for sure the most famous recipe, the most famous dressing for pasta in Italy and all over the world, which is pesto. So pesto is by survey even more known than pizza. So everybody knows pesto. And everybody knows Christopher Columbus, especially when we come to talk about North America. So Christopher Columbus was originally from Genoa, so the city of Genoa, which is the main city dividing the arch of Liguria into the western and eastern Riviera. So Cantine Lunae is based in the easternmost corner of Liguria, right on the border with Toscana. Actually, Colli di Luni, our appellation, is one of the few interregional appellations in Italy. 70% is under La Spezia, so Liguria. You see in that picture La Spezia Gulf. So that's the city of La Spezia, yeah. That's a very important, in Italy, a very important city for, you know, the Navy. Is one of the main Navy harbor in Italy. And 30% is under Massa Carrara. So Massa Carrara is Tuscany. So you can find Colli di Luni both in Toscana and Liguria. Of course, being on the border with Tuscany, we share almost the same tradition with Tuscany as for the red wines. But today we're gonna introduce our Vermentino. So Vermentino has been grown for centuries in Liguria, and somebody says that Vermentino was originally from our region and then was, let's say, exported by the Genoese colonization over Corsica and Sardinia to those islands. By the way, it's been there for many centuries, so we say that Vermentino is native to Liguria, actually. And you can find Vermentino all along Liguria. So you have Vermentino from the western part of Liguria and the eastern part as well. Being based in the Colli di Luni, of course, we produce a Vermentino which is somehow different because of the territory of the terroir, the very peculiar terroir. And that makes, you know, the difference between the Vermentino from our area and those from Sardinia and more recently from Toscana, from the coastal line of Toscana. I know that some of you already tasted last week, probably, Vermentino from my friend Luca, Cantina Mesa. That's a very good expression of Vermentino. I will never say a single bad thing about that Vermentino because Luca is a great friend and the Vermentino is very well made. Is one of for me, is one of the best Vermentino from Sardinia. But today we will have the chance of tasting a different expression of the Vermentino. Why? Because you know, the vineyards sit between the sea, which is just a couple of kilometers in front of our vineyards, but we are also backed by tall mountains, so the Apennines. Here we call this specific part of the Apennines, we call them Equine Alps. Why Alps? They are not part of the Alps. So the Alps are the crown of Italy, while the Apennines are the backbone of Italy, but they have been called Alps for forever because they are quite tall. So they reach more than 2,000 meters. So you have peaks reaching more than 2,000 meters, 7 kilometers far from the sea. That means very hot days during summertime, but cool nights because of the mountain breeze. So this gap in temperature, of course, gives to the wine the acidity, the freshness, which is typical of the Vermentino in our region. So the company was started back in 1966 by Paolo Bosoni. It's still a family-owned company. So we are by far the largest company in Liguria. Just remember that Liguria represents the third smallest producing region in Italy. So many of you probably have never had the occasion to taste a wine from Liguria because most of the wineries are selling the wine, not even domestically, I would say locally. So to tourists coming to Liguria. We are by far the largest and we are supplying many countries around the world with our wines. So Paolo founded the company back in 1966. It used to be before a combined business of agriculture, wine, growing and winemaking, and olive, of course, olive oil production. Then in 1966, he decided to focus only on wines. And he was among the promoters of Colli di Lunae as an appellation. So the Colli di Lunae is quite recent, so dating back to 1989. But Paolo was, I would say, kind of visionary because when he started the company as a, focused on only on vineyards, he was then studying, the best clones for the production of Vermentino in our area in the 90s. So he did this research together with the University of Torino and the CNR. So CNR is Centro Nazionale di Ricerche, is the National Institute for Research in Italy. And that was very important just to detect the best clones and to start planting the vines according to that study. And we are still using that study in planting the new vineyards because, of course, that works very well. So we understood that, of course, the peculiar microclimate in our region had to be, paired with the through the exact or the best clones for the Vermentino.
Michele, is there anything that stretch from the 1960s to the present day is an important one, right, in terms of what's happened in Italy and certainly in Liguria? Is there anything that has changed in the vinification of Vermentino at Cantine Lunae over that period?
Yeah, absolutely. I usually mention about a movie we ran at our property with very old images, of people during the harvest time. So the harvest time was the most important part of the year because everybody was taking part in the harvest, even the little guys, the little boys and girls. And if you see those images, you see vineyards, the vines are 3 meters tall. So of course, people were looking at more at quantity than quality at that time, because of course, wine was considered part of the diet. So it was a food. It was not something to enjoy with friends, etc. That was calories, for people working in the land. And so we totally changed our mind. So nowadays, quality is by far more important than quantity. We limited a lot the production per hectare. We started planting vines, adopting the Guyot training technique instead of the pergola or other techniques. You have to imagine that in our area, we have very small patches of land all over the hillside and the flat, the plain. So it's not a scenery like you can see in Barolo or you can see in Toscana. So you see small plots of vineyards hidden among, you know, the woods, the olive trees, etc. It's not high impact with like in other regions, but these, on the contrary, allows us to have very different qualities because of the different exposure of the single vineyards to the sun, the different orientation, the different position, the different soil, because we are talking about vineyards in the valley, so alluvial sandy soil, and then up to the hillside on a more pebbly soil. The mountains you see on the background of our vineyards are the, as I mentioned before, the Epon Alps. And you see the white spots on the mountains. That was a picture taken during summertime, as you can see from the green. And those are the marble quarries of Carrara. So the white marble from Carrara, the one that Michelangelo used to carve the statue on the Piety of Michelangelo, is world-renowned masterpiece by Michelangelo. So they have been quarrying for over 2,000 years over there. So that's the natural scenery in our area. I would say a moon's, like a moon scenery with the old whites and powdery marble over there.
Lunar landscape, no doubt.
Lunar landscape. Sorry.
It's a really special place. Any place where you have the convergence of mountains and the sea is always going to be beautiful. I can say that because I live in Seattle. Kelly, thank you for that. I'm really, again, excited to taste this delicious Vermentino. I've had it many times. One of the great food pairing wines, and as we were discussing before the session started, Michele himself and then Diego and his whole family at Cantine Lunae take food very seriously. So we will, in the breakout session, hopefully get a chance to talk a little bit more about these wines and what they pair with at the table and fun stuff like that. For the sake of time, we're going to jet over to Montalcino. Actually, Shannon is not in Montalcino. She's in South Carolina. But she's going to tell us all about what's happening at Castello Banfi these days. And I just, again, will preface this by noting that there has been an amazing amount of research into Sangiovese and its various clones. And Banfi's been a major player in that. So Shannon, take it away. Tell us about your particular part of the world. In as much as we want to hear about South Carolina, I'm sure there's more interesting things to hear about Montalcino and what's going on with Sangiovese.
And typically I would be there right now. Oh my God, I miss Montalcino so much. Well, welcome everyone. I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to talk about Brunello di Montalcino and Castello Banfi. Our vineyards are located on a 7,100 acre estate, and we grow this beautiful grape variety, Sangiovese, that's locally known as Brunello. Now, Brunello is interesting, and so is Sangiovese. And James, actually, I could take hours because we've done so many studies. Castello Banfi was founded, the estate was founded in 1978 by John and Harry Mariani. It happens that in 1978, that was the year I started at Banfi. So I have actually watched this dream unfold. Now, Brunello is the reason why we went to Montalcino. In 78, when I started at Banfi, I remember John Mariani saying that his goal was to make a better Brunello. We were the first to import Brunello into the United States. We weren't the first to make it. Brunello is a wine that was born by Clemente Sante in 1865. He was the first producer in the area to take one grape variety, Sangiovese, and make it into a wine. However, the wine wasn't really discovered until 1888, when his grandson, Ferruccio Biondi Santi, came out at the Milan Wine Fair with a wine that he called Brunello of Montalcino. When I started back in 1978, if you looked at all of the writings here in the United States anyway, they talked about two different clones of Sangiovese. They talked about a clone of Sangiovese from the Chianti area that was called Sangiovese Piccolo. And they talked about a clone from Montalcino that was called Sangiovese Grosso. What we found in our studies, because when we went in 1978, we asked what were the best clones to plant, and nobody could tell us because nobody had ever done the work or the research. And John and Harry Mariani said, we're going to do it. There were over 650 different clones of Sangiovese just in the Montalcino area. What we did was we isolated what were perceived as 180 of the best. And then we planted those a couple of rows at a time. And if you came to see us in the early and mid 1980s, it was amazing. You would come into the winery and we had these small fermenters in the back of the winery that were fermenting each of these different rows to see what we would get. Because when we started out in 78 and we started planting, it was a massive selection of planting. Over the years, though, we studied these different clones. And in fact, James, you just mentioned Chianti Classico Due Mille. That project was started as a result of the work that we were doing in Montalcino, because the Chianti producers, the Chianti Classico producers, wanted to go deeper into these clones that we had started studying in their area and see what was best for their zone, as we had done in the Montalcino area. We eventually registered 15 of what were perceived to be the best. And the wine that we're tasting today, the Castello Banfi Poggio alla Mura, is the result of our work, of our clonal selection. We isolated these 15 different clones. We found, though, that there were 3 clones that seemed best suited to our property and soils. What we found out with all this research is that there is no super clone of Sangiovese. There are clones that are generally good all around, but they don't give us a great wine every vintage. It's when we combine clones like Janus 50 or Janus, as the Italians say, with BF30 and with Janus 10 that we get an extraordinary wine vintage after vintage. And that's what our Poggio alla Mura is all about that you're tasting. Poggio alla Mura was the result of all of this clonal research, which we're still continuing today. And this is a wine that's made with specifically 3 clones of Sangiovese grown on our property. We started planting these clones in vineyards surrounding Castello Banfi, and you're looking at the castle and you can see the green vineyards that surround the castle on basically all sides. Those are the vineyards that go into the production of our Poggio alla Mura. You know, for us, we had to start from the ground up. When we went in, sustainability wasn't a trendy term. And I can remember, and as I mentioned, we have 7,100 acres on our property, but we've never dedicated more than 2,200 acres of that property to the vine. And the reason why only such a small amount was because we learned very early on that in order to make the best wine possible, if you allowed Mother Nature to come in and bring the good pests to eat the bad pests, well, we could use less pesticides, herbicides, in the production of our wine. So we started off with an idea of what was called dynamic development, and it soon became known as sustainability. And we were actually the first winery in the world to be recognized for our ethical, social, and sustainable responsibility. So we're very proud of what we've done and the research that we've been able to share with not only the producers in Montalcino, but I can remember, it was probably about 20 years ago, I was having lunch with one of the Chianti producers, in fact, in Montalcino. And he said to me, Sharon, I went to the nursery this morning and I just bought BF30. Is that one of your clones? And I said, yes, it is. Because the studies that we did have been shared all around the world. And that's what we believe these winemaking trends are all about. We started off from the ground up, but then we took that further. Not only did we create what we have as a constellation of single vineyards, we have 29 different soil types, 100 different microclimates, but we didn't stop just with that. What we did was we moved on to the winery and said, how can we combine the traditions of the past? I love it that you brought up the idea that winemakers are now looking to the past and saying, okay, how can we innovate with those traditions? We looked at that too very early on, and it's why we created the Horizon Project. Our Horizon Project takes the best of stainless steel and the best of wood fermentation. You know, back in 1888, when the first Brunello was born. In fact, I was in New York at the Italian Trade Commission in 1988 when Biondi Santi brought in a bottle of their 100-year-old Brunello from 1888, and they opened it and they deemed it still drinkable after 100 years. It was absolutely an amazing day. What we at Banfi did over the years, when we came in, we brought stainless steel because everybody was talking about stainless steel and how it creates and brings freshness and fruitiness to the wine. However, you know, the pendulum started to swing, and we said there has to be something said for a wine that was fermented in wood that can last over 100 years. So that's where our Horizon Project began. Horizon combined stainless steel with wood to create a wine, Poggio alla Mora, of extraordinary excellence. And
Sharon,
what it
I'm
was,
so
yes, go
glad
ahead.
I just want to interject briefly. So glad you brought that up, because when I visited with Rudy, what was it, 9 years ago, and he showed us these upright fermenters that are literally half stainless steel, I think on the bottom, and then
And the top.
wood and the top, right? Which makes winemakers' job a lot easier for cleaning and all that sort of stuff. And then wood in the center. It was one of those moments where you go, what is that? What is that? Holy cow, that's really cool. So yes, keep going, but I just want to interject there. That really blew my mind.
I'm telling you, it blew mine. We actually started in 2002 with 2 prototypes in the winery. Today we have 24 of the real fermenters. And I'll never forget walking into the winery. Rudy took me to the back and said, oh, this is new. I actually thought that it was wood that was surrounding a stainless steel fermenter to make it look nicer, but it wasn't. Rudy made me stick my head in. He said the fermenter had just arrived the day before. There was nothing in it. And I was so amazed. My jaw dropped because it's like, oh my God, yes. And he said, we wanted to combine the traditions of the past, 100-year-old Brunello, still drinkable, with the innovations of the present, stainless steel that everybody knows is extraordinary, to make wines for today and for the future. And I never forgot that. That's our philosophy at Banfi. But those Horizon tanks, vats, fermenters are, to me, still so extraordinary. You know, wood, we know, helps set the color. It also brings out the sweet tannins. But On the other side of the coin, the flip side of the coin, stainless steel allows you to ferment at controlled temperature and bring out the freshness and the fruitiness in the wine. And we were able to combine both of those together to create something that's extraordinary. And I know, James, you were talking about in comments that you sent to all of us about vine training systems and how we've gone to the future and then come back to the past. You know, at Banfi, when we started out in 78, we started out with Casarsa. But then what we did was we went to Cordon Spur, and now we combine Cordon Spur with Albola that you were talking about. So, you know, to us, it's amazing because you always have to look to the past to move forward in the future. And that's what we've been trying to do at the winery with this grape variety Sangiovese. And you also mentioned at the beginning the white wine that was known 150 years ago. It's still very well known in Tuscany. It's Muscadella Di Montalcino. In fact, when we went in 1978, by law, there were only 2 grapes that you could plant. You could plant Moscato, known as Muscadello, and you could plant Sangiovese, aka Brunello. And we did that, but over the years we were able to experiment. And today we're proud of the fact that our experiments took on other grape varieties, Cabernet, Merlot, Syrah, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio. And today those are grapes that by law are now part of the traditional past, and Castello Poggio alla Mora. So Poggio alla Mora is the wine that you're tasting today. And Poggio alla Mora was the wine in 1978, the Brunello that we were importing. Not the same. The property at that time was owned by Dr. Giovanni Mastropaolo. He was getting on in years, and he didn't have the wherewithal, he didn't have the ability, he had no children to pass his winery on. And John and Harry kept saying, you've got to reinvigorate the vineyards. I remember going to the winery in 1978, just after we purchased the land. And around the castle, our castle is called still by its historic name, Castello Poggio alla Mora, because we didn't feel that we should come in and change the name of this historic property that was born on or built on Etruscan ruins from the 3rd and 4th century BC. And I remember going around, and as you're seeing Greg show these vineyards around the castle, there were a couple of vineyards around the castle, but you would see one vine with grapes. You would see another vine that the grapes were, they looked like raisins. The vines were decimated. They were desiccated. And what John and Harry kept saying to Dr. Mastropaolo is that you've got to replant. He didn't want to do it. And he said to us, buy my property. And eventually we did, and we bought adjacent properties. And that's what we're all about. We're all about bringing sustainability to the winery, to our vineyards. We're about innovating and bringing out what's new, but never forgetting the traditions of the past.
Sharon, that's perfect. I would love it. I don't know if we can do it in the breakout session. I'm not sure if I will be in your group, but I want to pick your brain a little bit more about the Albola and how that adaptation, I can picture it in my mind, and I think I've actually seen it on the vine, but how that adaptation comes to bear in the vineyard. Perfect. Thank you so much. Let's go on up to Tuscany and Alessandro from Castello d'Alba, and specifically in the village of Rada, one of the Classico villages. Really stunning, amazing landscape. You can't imagine it. This will help, of course, via the global diagram to see it, but you kind of can't imagine how, what's the word? Kind of rustic, beautifully rustic it is here, and just how hilly it is. You hear about the hills of Chianti, of course, but it really is fascinating just how much things change from one hillside to the next. So Alessandro, welcome. Thanks for being here, and tell us a little bit about your specific part of Chianti and how Castello d'Alba has changed over time.
Hello, James. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, everybody. I am here with Silvia. She has the sales manager of Castello di Albola, and together we will try to explain our territory, our landscape, and our philosophy. Castello di Albola is a very, very old estate in the highest part of Chianti area. Chianti area is in between Florence and Siena, and Castello di Albola have a history that starts in Middle Age, so in 12th and 13th century. But I like that Silvia tried to explain. She speaks better than me English, and my English is not very, very good. And I will back to try to explain about wine. Please, Silvia.
Okay, nice. Hi, everybody. We're already a couple of glasses and a cheese platter and some crostini later, but you know, that's what we do here. It's dark around us. You can see on the map that we're basically in the middle of nowhere. As Alessandro said, we're between Florence and Siena in the geographic territory, which is called Chianti, where today, since 1996, we have the appellation called Chianti Classico DOCG, because if we go back a couple of years, so to 1716, the territory here called Chianti had a wine which was called Sangiovese del Chianti. So the Sangiovese from Chianti, which was then over time enlarged the territory. So today there is a wine which is called Chianti DOCG, which goes far beyond the borders of the geographic territory of Chianti. We are here in actually the first capital of the Chianti territory, which is called Radda in Chianti, which was the capital of the Lega del Chianti, which was basically comes from a nice story dating back to the Middle Ages, when Florence and Siena were fighting about the territory, and had their knights to start from Florence in the north and from Siena in the south, in order to decide where the borders of these two cities were going to be. So from the north, the Florentine knight started, or both knights had to start when the rooster was singing in the morning. Also, only that the Florentines were a little bit smarter and had their rooster starve in the dungeon. And so when they let him out in the morning, he was starving. And so the first thing that came to his mind was to sing. So the knight from Florence was able to depart early in the morning, whereas the knight from Siena could only depart when their rooster was, you know, with all its Italian time, was willing to sing in the morning. So when the knight from Siena started from the south, the knight from Florence was basically already arrived, or had already arrived at Siena. So at that time, all the territory of Chianti was owned by Florence. And so still today, if you look at our bottles, or if you look at bottles with the Chianti Classico DOCG, you find the black rooster, which is still today the symbol of the DOCG, of the Chianti Classico DOCG, and at that time of the Lega del Chianti, of which Radda in Chianti was the capital. So Alessandro was already saying, and if you could look around here, it's very dark around here. And that's why we had to drink a little bit, because we're on 650 meters above sea level. And basically our vineyards slope down towards the valley, and then going back up, you arrive at the village of Radda in Chianti. Actually on the map, you see it really nicely. So we're sitting up there on the hills of the Chianti Mountains. And then the vineyards slope down to approximately 400 meters above sea level. You already see really nicely the small fragmentation of the vineyards, which I think Sharon was also already hinting a little bit to, is Sangiovese is a variety which reacts really strongly to micro terroir. And so the fragmentation of the vineyards is something very important to us and probably to most of the producers here, because every single microterroir has its own vinification, its own harvest time, and a lot of times also its own clone of Sangiovese. And basically, as you can see, our territory is, well, Castello di Albola has 900 hectares of property, of which around 100 hectares are dedicated to vineyards. And I think now going a little bit deeper into soils and vineyards and vinification, I will leave the word to Alessandro.
Yes, Radda is Sangiovese. We think that Sangiovese is the soul of Chianti Classico. At this altitude, Radda is an extreme territory because it's a so high level. And so that means that we have an extremization of bouquet, of nose, of the wine, of the Sangiovese. So for that reason, for that extremization, for that very strong terroir that we have in Radda, I think it's possible to do a great wine. We produce more or less 90% Chianti Classico in a different way. Tonight we stay, we taste Riserva of Chianti Classico, that for us is a best selection of Sangiovese, because like Silvia told before, Castello di Albola have a lot of parcellization. So it's always Sangiovese, but it's a different soil, is a different altitude, is a different exposition. So that means that every part, every vineyard is a little bit of a different taste, different nose of Sangiovese. So every year we do a great work of parcellization and to do a single vinification and single maturation and single production of each part of the vineyard. For that reason, we can choose the best wine and to blend and to create a wine, a Chianti Classico Riserva, that is the blend of the best Sangiovese of the state. In the terms of, I heard before about clonal selection. Was that also in Castello di Albola, like in every part of Tuscany? So the clonal selection is so important. Why? Because it's important to find a good clone for that kind of climate, for that kind of micro terroir. We are quite lucky in the change of climate that we observe today, because we are so high. So we have not a great problem, a big problem of hot, warm temperature. Because I want to say that we finished the harvest last Friday. So we are so late we have a long cycle of vegetation. So that the cold temperature help that today help that area. So
Alessandro, that is fascinating that you are still able to harvest in mid to late October. I think, in the past 10 vintages, we just assume that everything in Europe is being picked up by the end of September.
Yes.
And it's also, I find it really compelling and interesting to think about Sangiovese in all of its different expressions. I think we generally, at least in the States, have kind of a mindset, right? We think about Sangiovese from Chianti and oftentimes blended with other varieties, and then the Sangiovese Grosso of Brunello. But of course, there's Sangiovese from Romagna, there's Sangiovese all over Italy. It's really fascinating to try them. And but then also within your estate, you have different clones of Sangiovese planted in different parts, and so that becomes your wine rather than, you know, blending in Canaiolo or Colorino or other varieties. It's the differences of Sangiovese that come together to make your expression of Rada, and I think it's just really cool. One last question I'll just pose before we have to jet down to Sicily. You have how have things changed, or have they, in the winery? Are you using more or less oak than in the past? New oak, I should say. Are you using different barrel sizes? Are there other things that you're doing that are different than what you've done in the past?
No, il discorso cosa utilizziamo in cantina, perciò un po' tutte le nostre anche l'anfora.
Ah, sì. Yeah, yeah. I will answer, James, about that the container, but I want to say just a little thing, because one of the big changing of Castello di Albola in the last years is that in 2019 Castello di Albola became organic. It's 130 hectares of vineyards in Rada and Chianti. It's organic. So it's a big, it's huge, important thing for us, for agronomy, because it is good, fantastic, or be organic, but after you have to do. So the big and the strongness, the economy, in terms of the cost, the value, we work in the vineyard. We worked in the vineyard. In the last 10 years, 15 years, we worked in the vineyard to do the best grapes that is possible, okay? So we improve the pruning, we improve the green management. So we improve, we put money over there. In the cellar, cellar is important because I am a winemaker. So we are a little bit architect, no, of wine, of course. But what we can do is not destroy what we create in the vineyard. So the work in the cellar is to find the best formula to be delicate, soft, with our good wine. So not stress, find about container. We try in the last years to use also amphora, because we don't like so much to leave the red wine in the stainless steel. Stainless steel is perfect for some part of the life of the wine, but not for other part. So we prefer to use the container that have a exchange with the outside. And so wood is a historical part, but beton, concrete, and amphora and bottles. So we prefer to use that than keep the wine in the impermeabile container like inox. But in general, to speak about the process, the proceed in the winery is delicate. Also, we are in maturation right now. We are in the vinification. So don't a lot, pump over when you extract. You want to extract. Not a lot. Soft.
Yeah, that is great. And I think when we get to tasting the wine, we'll probably have more questions for you about what happens in the cantina while you're making the wine. So thank you, Alessandro. It is time for us to depart for Sicily. And
thank you.
Rob, you are not in Sicily, unfortunately.
Far from it.
But nonetheless, tell us about Duca di Salaparuta. And I think, here's something that a picture you can paint for us. Many of us, being sommeliers and wine professionals in the U.S., are probably quite familiar with Etna, for instance, these days. It's all the rage. But maybe we've forgotten a little bit about the middle of Sicily and the great Nero d'Avola. So please take it away. Tell us a little bit about this part of Sicily and what's happening with Nero d'Avola in this time.
Well, thank you, James. I think a couple of things to keep in mind. Most people's perception of Sicily is that it's a hot, dry rock in the middle of the Mediterranean. And parts of it are. When you're on top of Etna, you actually have a ski resort that operates for the better part of the year. When you go down to the western part of the island in Trapani province, it's rolling hills, very reminiscent of Carneros. But where the Sumarchese vineyard is, where we're going, I shot Greg the coordinates. We're in Butera, in Racy. And this is an area that was first planted to vines, just 7th century BC by the Greeks. So we have a history that goes back literally, thousands of years. Racy province, Racy in Castello province, south central, it's really a mild province. The land is absolutely awful. It's good for nothing other than grape growing. And the reason for that, it was deforested very early on. About 40 kilometers from the vineyard is Argento, which is some of the greatest Greek ruins on the planet. So in this very hot, dry area of the vineyard, we have to farm differently. We have to approach things differently. We're at about 1,000 to 1,500 feet in elevation. We're overlooking the sea. But one of the things that we have to contend with in Sicily that is not as much a factor in other parts of the island is we're closer to the equator. The sun is so much stronger. So we in the vineyard have to take the sun into consideration. Now, the good news is you think with the sun, you have heat. Thankfully, because of the prevailing winds coming off the Mediterranean, we have a cooling system. But all these things factor into how we have to farm and then how we have to produce. So the grape of Nero d'Avola, otherwise known as Calabrese, first thing to know is it has nothing to do with Calabria. The Nero d'Avola grape actually has a DNA relationship to Malbec. And like Malbec, you can make it cheap and cheerful, as the Brits would say, or you can make a full-bodied wine. We do the full gamut at the winery. Excuse me. When you're looking at this grape related to Malbec, also has a link to Catarratto and Inzolia. So like many things on the island, it's just a mishmash of things that have come together over the centuries. The grape itself, you have to watch it. And then that's why, talking about in the vineyard, we use the Arbella system. And that is because of it's low to the ground. And it's a protectant against those strong winds that are coming across the vineyard. But we also use vertical trellising. And with that, we have to be careful on how we're pruning, because now you're pruning against sunburn. And so you're going to prune one side of the vine versus the other. So you're not going to do the southern facing side, because that's where we're going to get the sunburn and the damage to the fruit. So we have to be very careful in how we farm, and then take this blend of a traditional farming and then blend that with technology. So once we're harvesting and everything's hand harvested, we're farming sustainably. And we have to be careful with the resources that we have, because we're on an island, and your resources are very limited. We have to be very responsible in how we use water, especially in this part of the island where it is drought conditions. And you talk about climate change, Sicily is really feeling it. Our average temperature has climbed 3 degrees over the past 10 years. Our rainfall is falling off. And why it's more accelerated in Sicily is because it has been so deforested over time. So this looks like we're just about at the vineyard here, predominantly planted to Nero d'Avola. You have limestone soils with some beds of clay. We have planted some Vermentino, we've planted some Sauvignon Blanc, we have some Riesling and Muller Thurgau in the vineyard, but Nero is the backbone of Sicily. It's the workhorse. And this vineyard is relatively new. So the Arbella method was the initial planting back in 2002 when the Reina family acquired the vineyard. We've since been learning and experimenting as we go. We are fortunate that we have resources at our hands that other wineries aren't as fortunate to have. Our parent company provides us with just state-of-the-art technology. We actually will cool the grapes in the vineyard on harvest because we have a 3-hour plus drive to the winery outside of Palermo. So we want to make sure that when we're harvesting in that heat, you're doing everything you can to keep the quality of the fruit intact. Once we get up into the winery, we're state-of-the-art cellars. But here's where we start to blend technology with tradition. We love using barrique. And honestly, if you will walk through the cellars as I did the first time and said, oh my God, there are names that you'd see there in our cellars that you find in Burgundy and in Napa. So we're using the best coopers that we can source from. And I think that makes a big difference in the final product of wine, because we want to be as hands-off as possible. Let the grape make itself. It's like no different than how you cook a great steak is, have a great piece of meat and a really hot fire. Everything else from there is negotiable. And, that gives us the ability to make wines that are softer in tannins, that really pair well with our local cuisine. We'll talk about that in the breakout section. But, the influence to the island is everything. We are the crossroads of the Mediterranean. For those that don't know, Sicily was, first settled by the Greeks and conquered by the Phoenicians, the Byzantines. You had the period where it was conquered by North Africa. You had, the Normans. And in the Kingdom of Sicily, they also remind you that they looked at Garibaldi and the Italians as conquerors. It's a very, very independent island. And they like to keep it that way.
I love that. Basically everybody has invaded Sicily.
Everybody has invaded Sicily,
That
and the irony,
spirit of individuality is still remain.
Yes, very much so. They like to say that there are two forms of government on the island. There's the government from Rome, and then there's the local government, which we see here in the U.S. as well. The Ometra, as they would like to say. A couple things that we will do in the vineyard, just to circle back, is because of the tendency of Nero to be susceptible to powdery mildew. We are doing a lot of green harvesting. We are doing a lot of leaf pulling. We spend a lot of time in that vineyard, a lot of time, and it is a lot of man hours. But if you're going to farm sustainably and you're going to farm for the best fruit, that's what you need to do, because we need to control the vigor. We need to control the yields, because Nero d'Avola, left to its own devices, very similar to Zinfandel, you get massive yields. And that was the issue with Sicilian wine probably for the past 100 years. The focus was on quantity over quality. And our estate has its humble beginnings back in 1824. We're the new kids on the block within the company. Parent company started in Serrano in 1547. But the Aliata family that founded the winery, were the first to experiment. And we were the first to actually bottle cork finished wine in Sicily back in 1824. At the turn of the century, Enrico Aliata had spent time doing an internship in Saltern, and he decided to use free run juice. So this set the stage for a lot of the innovation that we had been doing for years. At the time, the Sicilian consumers said, what is this, finesse wine? We want high alcohol, we want power, and we were going in the other direction. So it really set the stage for us to be innovators in the cellar, in the vineyard, to embrace, what brought us to the table, embrace technology, and really, work to make the best wines possible.
That's awesome, Rob. I think everybody, you just made us all pretty thirsty. So let's get some wine on our palates and continue the discussion flowing.